Benjamin Netanyahu is going to take over Gaza, all of it, or maybe just part of it. It's really unclear exactly what Benjamin Netanyahu is going to do. A lot of fanfare going on about this of late, a lot of claims, a lot of threats, a lot of people saying this is not going to work. No, it is going to work. And we're going to try to make some sense out of that today, because there is a lot of confusing and even conflicting information coming out, to include even at the highest of levels. And to try to make sense of this today, we have back with us again on the show today, Rose Kalanik, Director of Middle East Program at Defense Priorities, where we are colleagues there. And we had you on last time, and really glad to have you back on again today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Well, look, this is kind of a sticky issue here. You have the UN Security Council going to meet on Saturday to take a look at Israel's plans to control of Gaza City. Now, this was originally, even just a couple of days ago, maybe even yesterday, the claim was that Netanyahu had sought permission and was tentatively given it to take over all of Gaza, the entire Gaza Strip. And then I guess just within the last 12 hours or so, it's like, well, okay, just Gaza City. That's actually what we meant. What do you take or make of this whole operation here? Why now is Netanyahu making a claim that he's going to take over things as opposed to the 75% that they apparently already have?
Yeah, why now is an interesting question. I mean, what I think is going on here is something that is sometimes referred to as salami tactics or salami slicing in international politics, where you usually don't see it quite in this stark a term. But it's where one country, tries to revise the status quo or push boundaries in some way, not by sort of grabbing all of what it wants at once, but rather taking small slices of salami, right? Very gradually, incrementally going through, and achieving a goal that way. So it's surprising to me that they ever said, or that it was ever leaked or suggested that they were debating taking all of Gaza. And now they're saying, well, they're just going to go into Gaza City and occupy it. But, this sounds a lot to me like the same rhetoric we've heard over the past almost 2 years, where it's like, well, it's going to be a couple weeks long operation. Well, we're going to move just a little bit south. We're not going all the way to Rafah. Okay, we're going all the way to Rafah, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, I think, just the next step in this long incremental process of wearing down any resistance to potentially taking over the whole strip.
Well, and I was actually going to kind of go back to some of those things that earlier to say, well, where is this even going? Well, I mean, what is the objective here? Because I remember that issue in the early phases of the war where, there was going to be tanks in Rafah, and there was a lot of warnings. You can't go in there. No, we're going to go in there. They went in there. Drove a lot of the people out. Then they said, oh, well, there's 4 Hamas battalions up. There's only 4 left, and we got to go in there and get them. So they went in there and almost literally leveled the place. I've been told by people who have been there since that there's virtually nothing but dust left now. You can't even tell there was a city there. And now then we're talking about, again, they're back up in the north and going to start coming back to the south. What's the objective here? What are they trying to get it done?
Yeah, I mean, what they've said that they want to happen is make sure that Hamas is never in control of Gaza ever again. And that's what they're trying to do. I personally look at this and it looks suspiciously like ethnic cleansing to me. That the idea is you push everybody out that you possibly can. And that includes civilians, that includes Hamas. The problem that Israel faces is a problem that a lot of countries face anytime they're dealing with something like an insurgency, right? Hamas is essentially acting like an insurgency in a way. And the Israeli state is pushing down and trying to push them out. But the problem is insurgents can hide among the civilian population. It's very, very hard to get them. For countries that don't care at all about human rights, say like the Russias of the world, this problem is not that hard to solve because you just go in and destroy the place indiscriminately, right? Israel is a democracy. They're trying to maintain support in the West and throughout the rest of the world. And so they're trying to adhere to some standards of human rights and, laws of war and these other sorts of things, which make it very difficult to just push everybody out or just kill everybody, right? But that is ultimately, they're moving more and more towards pushing everybody out as a way of solving the problem by just leveling the place and getting it rid of everyone.
But that's what I was going to say. Are they really trying to adhere to international standards, or
Well,
are they just saying they are? Because it seems to me it's a lot more of the rhetoric and a lot less of the actions.
Yeah, it's very hard to know. I mean, I think there are some countries that would have just done this from the beginning, right? Just gone in and leveled the place from the beginning, right? And Israel hasn't done that. They've done it in an incremental kind of way, and they've kept their options open to escalate throughout, maybe in hopes that they find a way to solve it without going all the way, or maybe because it allows them to make these incremental moves that avoid, massive resistance from the rest of the world or stirring up, opposition in the United States that's really strong. So, I don't know in their hearts of heart, in their heart of hearts, if they're like committed to these ideals, but they do have to contend with them in their relations with other countries.
Well, and let's take a look at that other country. The chief among them is the United States. This was 3 days ago when President Trump was asked whether or not he supports Netanyahu taking over all of Gaza.
Would you support Israel reoccupying all of Gaza, as has been suggested by some Israeli officials?
Well, I don't know what the suggestion is. I know that we are there now trying to get people fed. As you know, $60 million was given by the United States fairly recently to supply food, and a lot of food, frankly, for the people of Gaza that are obviously not doing too well with the food. And I know Israel is going to help us with that in terms of distribution and also money. We also have the Arab states are going to help us with that in terms of the money and possibly distribution. So that's what I'm focused on. As far as the rest of it, I really can't say. That's going to be pretty much up to Israel.
Well, now let's look at the reality. So that's what Trump says. It's really up to Israel. But it's hard for Israel to do anything unless we don't either give it a green light or the physical capability. So what do you make of President Trump's comment there? And does he really have the flexibility to tell Netanyahu what to do?
I don't think he can just sort of tell Netanyahu what to do and expect Netanyahu to do it. I mean, they don't have that kind of relationship. No heads of state do. But my sense is that the president doesn't really want to be bothered with this. I mean, I don't think he likes the images of what's happening in Gaza, but he doesn't want the U.S. to get more involved, which I think is a good thing. The problem is that the U.S. is involved because we give so much military aid to Israel every year. And the president has, in some ways, stuck his neck out talking about turning Gaza into this Riviera of the Middle East and these sort of fantastical plans that suggest that, they suggest that the U.S. would be okay with depopulating the Strip. And that provides political cover to these maximalist sort of impulses that are coming out of some aspects or some parts of the Israeli government. So, I think Trump just doesn't want to have to deal with this problem and is trying to keep it at arm's length as much as possible. But of course, the problem keeps coming up because the U.S. is arming Israel, even as Israel is doing this. And from time to time, Trump does say things like, gee, wouldn't it be great if the U.S. just took it over?
Yeah, no, I'm saying no. Actually, it wouldn't. It
Right.
would not be great. Don't do it. Let's
it would not
take
be
that
great.
back. Let's don't even. But in terms of what Netanyahu actually did say, Fox News sat down with him. I think it was last night, and I saw this video actually aired this morning. Here's what he's saying now.
Will Israel take control of all of Gaza?
We intend to, in order to assure our security, remove Hamas there. I don't want to occupy Gaza forever. I don't want to govern Gaza. I want to have a different governance there that basically is willing to live in peace with Israel and give Gazans a different future.
Okay, I mean, it's one thing to say, yeah, I want to create a different future, one that has Gazans help, but I mean, you got to look at what's actually happening on the ground when Israel is literally pulverizing entire portions of the Strip. Where is there any kind of motivation for the Gaza people to feel they have a future with Israel?
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to see. Very difficult to see. And, Netanyahu is saying what he has to say at this point in the war, right? He's not going to say, yes, we're going to go in it and keep it forever. And they may not even want to do that. But I think we need to keep in perspective that this is Netanyahu, and Netanyahu has never been somebody who supported a two-state solution, right? He's been against the whole concept of land for peace going back through the 1990s, right? And he's been in and out of power since the 1990s, right? So he's not somebody who thinks that there should be a viable Palestinian state at all, let alone a viable Palestinian state that a portion of which is located in Gaza. So I think we need to sort of keep that in mind first and foremost. He's floated this idea that maybe it would be turned over to some sort of Arab civilian administration, but it's not going to be Hamas. It's also not going to be the Palestinian Authority. And that sounds okay. Like, all right, sure, we'll see. We'll play it. It's sort of like we'll play it by ear. But I think he and everyone who watches this closely knows full well that there's no Arab government that's going to
that's what I was
come
going
in
to
and
ask
help
you.
them do this.
Is there somebody out there in waiting? I've never heard of one.
No. And I mean, nobody wants to take over this problem. I mean, nobody wants to take over this problem, right? This is a complete disaster, right? A man-made disaster. No one wants to take it over. But any Arab country that would, if they committed peacekeeping forces, or if they, helped with the administration, they could be reasonably accused of being complicit in helping Israel destroy Gaza by sort of helping them clean up for it afterwards. And that is just politically, a no-go for Arab countries. There's no way they're going to do that. So, you can sort of say those platitudes, but also I don't think that he thinks anybody's ever going to step up and do it. Right. But that's not his problem at this point. Right.
Yeah. He does seem to be a short-term fix kind of a
Yes.
guy. Interesting in terms of what other people are saying about this. We obviously know what Netanyahu is saying, what his hopes are. There are some pro-Israeli voices that think that this is not only going to be a good idea, it's going to be a win-win and a short deal.
Unlike war games or simulation games, once this begins, everyone loses.
Sorry, Gary,
control.
not that one. I'm looking for Cohen.
Here's what I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is signaling right now. This is going to be a big strategic and tactical push. It's going to be violent. There's going to be tons and tons of force put on northern Gaza, Gaza City, where those hostages are. Really what it comes down to, in my opinion, is pressure creates fresh intelligence. The moment the intelligence starts to roll again, the 20 hostages that Bibi just referred to, Israel needs to get in there and grab every one of them via the Amam, Seret Matkal, and start getting those hostages out. But they need intel and they need kinetic boots on the ground. The moment the hostages are extracted, it's game over for Hamas. The cameras are over. Now it's time to hand Gaza over to some Arab leadership and let them start ruling that place. I believe this is about pressure to create diamonds.
Pressure to create diamonds. Well, I guess that depends on your point of view, what this pressure is going to create. But he makes it sound like, yeah, this is no problem, man. Just go in there, bam, clean up, get the hostages out, game over. Do you think he's got any chance there?
None whatsoever. This is magical thinking. I mean, it's just magical thinking, right? Like, oh, well, if we push a little harder and then suddenly we'll have these intelligence breakthroughs. We'll magically know where the hostages are and evacuate them. And then we'll have achieved everything that we care about. Well, even if you evacuate all the hostages, which I certainly hope they're all returned, but even if you could somehow do that, like you get Superman to come and do this for you, right? That still doesn't resolve the problem of Hamas. What do you do with Hamas? Right? Yeah. You turn it over and Hamas is still there. I mean, it just beggars belief that anybody could seriously think that you're going to have rainbows and puppies as a result of what's going on, right? That they're not going to create diamonds from pressure. That's just not going to happen. But there is this very real problem for Israel of there are these hostages remaining, and some of them are believed to be alive. And the more that Israel pushes on Hamas, the harder, Hamas is in a difficult situation because if they kill the hostages, they've lost their leverage. If they hand over the hostages, they've lost their leverage. But Israel is putting the lives of hostages at even higher risk by pushing these more maximalist aims. And that's a serious problem.
Yeah, it is, because a lot of population inside of Israel is very much angry that they haven't gotten those hostages back. Even if they agree with some of the war aims, they don't agree with how it's being done with their own people. Okay, so that was a really pro-Israeli view. On the other side is a former Israeli, I think it was an intelligence officer, who is not so sanguine on where this could go.
Unlike war games or simulation games, once this begins, everyone loses control over the how it evolves. Meaning, that if Hamas is undeterred by this supposed bluff, then Israel begins the evacuation of Gaza City and begins a even fuller military occupation. And there's no such thing as temporary occupation. This has been said correctly, and he's a veteran on these issues. This is going to go on for many, many years. And so what looks now is some kind of a cunning and sophisticated and savvy negotiating tactic is going to end up with Israel occupying the Gaza Strip. Now, you have to understand, Kim, it's not as if Mr. Netanyahu has a plan to occupy Gaza. No, he has a plan to extend the war. He wants to prolong the war. He wants the war to go on. Occupation means you own the place.
Yeah, that's a little closer in line with what I think is more likely, is that this is just going to expand and continue the war, but not even provide a possibility, no kind of viable path to seeing it come to an end under any circumstances. Do you see it differently?
I mean, again, it depends. It depends how far the Israelis are really willing to go, right? If they intend to allow Palestinians to continue to live in the Gaza Strip in some sort of peacetime capacity, it's very hard to see that happening without an occupation that's ongoing, right? But there have also been lots of discussions, in terms of Israeli war aims and far right wing ministers coming out and saying, we want to kick everybody out of Gaza, right? We want to move these people. We want to move the population and take it back over, and not take it over and govern it in the sense that they're governing a Palestinian population. They want to take it over, kick out the Palestinians, and govern presumably, Israelis who would then relocate to Gaza, who had previously lived in Gaza up until Israel left in 2005, right? So, that to me is where I think the end game really is going. I don't see how occupying the place and having this forever insurgency with Hamas and Hamas sympathizers, as long as the civilian population is still intact, helps Israel, right? So I'm worried that that's not the model that they're operating with. They're operating with a model of just straight up population displacement and resettlement. And there are prominent members of the Israeli government who have made that argument. Now, whether that's ultimately what they're going to do, I don't know. But the logic of what they're doing makes a lot more sense to me to interpret it in that frame than a sort of occupying and giving it back frame, right? That's the frame the U.S. always had in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? But I don't think that that's the frame that they have in mind.
And I think that probably is going to be part of what this UN Security Council meeting coming up here is probably going to address that as well. And it's interesting because that an analyst we just showed you there, he talked about the difficulties that the Israeli Defense Forces had. In fact, the IDF general was apparently, the chief of staff was apparently against this because he saw the military task being extremely difficult and didn't want to go back in there. And Gary, if you could put that one headline up in there, I mean, when you just look at the nature of it, you're talking about there's 1 million Palestinians that are in, and it is just the Gaza City area. Even by that point, we're talking about you would have to, a senior Israeli official told the Times of Israel that the plan approved by the cabinet would see those civilians evacuated to the south. Where are you going to, let's just look at the practicality. Where are you going to move 1 million Palestinians from Gaza City anywhere else in the south?
Yeah, I that's an unanswerable question, I think, ultimately. And I think it's a question that, once you have facts on the ground, then you can resolve them, right? So in some ways, you move them south, you create a new crisis. Well, they can't all stay in the south, but they are all in the south. So maybe that creates pressure to go to this displacement sort of model of things. And maybe that's the intention all along, right? And there's been discussion of having humanitarian transit zones and humanitarian camps that are outside the Gaza Strip, right? There's even been discussion of sending people to third-party countries like Libya who would just be willing to accept and resettle Palestinians. And this is something that the U.S. has supposedly discussed, or American officials have supposedly discussed with Israeli officials over the past several weeks. So, I don't think that there's any illusion that that's a long-term solution, but it's a solution that moves them closer to potentially an ultimate goal of displacement by then forcing the issue, right? Saying, well, there's this even worse massive humanitarian calamity and we can't let it stand. So these people have to now leave the South.
And I mean, how does that square with international law and even American vital national interest? Because I can't see how that would be possible. I mean, because that literally is ethnic cleansing, and that's supposed to be against anything we believe in. So how do we participate in something like that? What does that mean for our standing in the world?
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I mean, none of this is in U.S. national interest. None of it, right? And arguably, the U.S. shouldn't be involved at all. The fact of the matter is, Trump is sort of putting himself out there as wanting to be a peacemaker, which gets us involved in negotiations and gets us on the hook for what happens. And we have this ongoing funding that we give to Israel, which we also increased right after the October 7th, 2023 attacks, right? So we're funding them. So we are implicated in what's going on. And that has two consequences that are both negative for the U.S., right? One is that it hurts our standing in the world and potentially makes us a target of terrorism, right? People are going to hate us for helping Israel as they are doing this, right? We already know that U.S. support for Israel is an irritant that has contributed to, for instance, bin Laden's decision to attack the United States on September 11th, right? It was something that he talked about over and over again, along with other grievances that he had. But this is one of them, right? So potentially it makes the U.S. and American citizens more vulnerable to terrorism. The other problem is that this is already, this conflict has already escalated beyond Gaza, right? It escalated into Lebanon. It's escalated into Yemen with the Houthis. It's come pretty close to escalating into Iran. Of course, we then also got into a war with Iran separate from Gaza with the nuclear issue. But the longer this goes on, the more likelihood that you have destabilization in the region, that you could have a wider war that then brings the United States in, because we have been providing Israel with defense, right? With, missile interceptors and all these other sorts of things. So it could become a war that drags in the United States, even though we have no strong national interest here. In fact, our national interest is that the war end as quickly as possible and that the people starving in Gaza are fed. I mean, that's the thing that's most in U.S. national interest here. None of talking about thus far helps the United States in any way.
Would certainly love to see that go on, to get disconnected, and then if anything we need to do to get those people taken care of, which would be in our interest. Now it's starting though to be a problem outside the borders as well, even among allies. I mean, we've had Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron saying that in September they're going to recognize the Palestinian state to try to bring some pressure on the Netanyahu government to change their tactics or policies. And then today I saw Friedrich Merz from Germany says, you know what, we're going to suspend arms. I mean, this is some of the things I think the U.S. could do, so maybe we'll be paying attention to this. And according to the Times of Israel, in a major change of course for Berlin, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said that the German government will not approve any exports of military equipment that could be used in the Gaza Strip until further notice. Merz, whose country is Israel's second biggest arms supplier after the United States, acknowledged Israel's right to disarm Hamas and seek the release of the remaining 50 hostages, but said Israel's decision, quote, makes it increasingly difficult to see how these goals can be achieved, end quote. And I guess he's saying, and we're not going to contribute to failure with German arms and ammunition and money. Do you see this, number one, standing, because Israel has been quite vocal in condemning this move, and they've been trying to put pressure on Keir Starmer and certainly on Macron and anybody else who's talking about it, recognizing Palestinian state. Does this have any chance to do anything, and do you think it'll spread?
It does seem to be spreading. It does seem to be spreading. As you know, I don't know that we've reached any kind of tipping point, but I do think there is a snowball effect going on that as more and more countries push back against this, it makes it easier for subsequent countries to push back and push back harder. Britain and France and Germany and Canada and other countries that have openly criticized Israel, I think that's given more political cover in the U.S. for some people in America to criticize what Israel's doing in Gaza. It could have an effect, but ultimately, cutting off weapons, if Germany does that, that could have more of a real effect, right? I'm not so sure that sort of declaring a recognition of the Palestinian state does a lot to help the situation for the people in Gaza. As long as those countries are still arming Israel and supporting Israel in other ways, it's kind of a cop out for them to say, well, we recognize the Palestinian state, but we're not, that's it. Right? Like that's not very satisfying to me. And I don't see how that leads in any positive direction for anybody involved, really. I mean, I suppose maybe it makes them feel better about the fact that they're doing something, but they're doing something that's pretty weak ultimately.
Well, in the last few minutes we have here, what should we do? What should the United States do if our primary interest is in seeking the best outcome it is for the United States and husbanding our resources, et cetera, because we obviously, according to a lot of reports, we expended an extraordinary amount of very limited ammunition during the 12-day war with Iran, especially with THAAD and other interceptor missiles. And the continuation of this one here is for humanitarian and moral reasons. It's also damaging us, as you mentioned. What should the United States do here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult question, but it's more, I think, politically difficult than it is strategically difficult. Strategically, if you're just thinking about sort of hard-nosed U.S. national interests, Trump should stop supporting what Netanyahu is doing in Gaza. He should not be giving Netanyahu a green light to take over the whole place. He shouldn't be saying things like, well, that's up to Israel. Is it up to Israel? I suppose, but it's a little bit up to us too if we are giving them the weapons that they need to do this. So I think that there needs to be at least a conversation in the United States about whether and to what extent we're going to continue supporting this war, right? You can support Israel in a bunch of ways that are not supporting their war in Gaza. So I don't think Trump needs to come out and say things like, yeah, we give him a green light to do it. I don't think Trump should be suggesting that the U.S. should take over Gaza or give any sort of political backing or cover for any sort of mass population displacement or ethnic cleansing, scenarios, right? Which is something that he has done. Because again, this is just going to have destabilizing consequences for the United States. I think that the U.S. should consider whether or not it wants to pay for this war. I mean, we are essentially paying for this war because we not only provide them with weapons, we don't just sell them the weapons, we give them weapons for free, right? And those weapons are being used to commit these acts, right? So something that Biden had done, he did a little investigation. I'm not sure how, he was pretty mealy-mouthed about it, right? Like, let's be honest, right? But, he at least sort of said, well, we should investigate whether American weapons are being used in ways that violate the Geneva Convention. At least if Trump sort of took some steps in that direction, that would be a positive thing. But, I don't see any reason why American taxpayers should be subsidizing Israel's war in Gaza. That's not something that makes sense from a strategic perspective for the United States or from a moral perspective, frankly. And, within international politics, there's a lot of times where what's strategic conflicts with what's moral, right? Where sometimes you have to just like swallow the moral arguments and say like, well, this is what we need to do, even though morally it sucks, right? This is not a case where that's the case, right? This is a case where both the morality and the strategic arrows point in the same direction. So like, why are we doing this? I don't understand.
Well, I agree. That's what we should do. And I hope we don't keep going down this path because I think it will harm us both in our international standing and even in our military capacity, which it already has diminished it so far. But we'll have to wait and see what happens here once this starts to unfold. But we really appreciate you coming on today and giving us just your insights into this so that we understand the situation a lot better.
Thanks so much, Danny. It was my pleasure.
All right. Thank you for coming on today. And by the way, we're going to do another show. We normally only do 2 a day, but we're going to do another one here in a little bit. Just watch your channel there. We'll see what time that comes on. But you may have seen President Trump has indicated that he's going to potentially go into Mexico and have some kinetic activities. You may even declare war on a lot of the drug cartels. Now, that may sound like it makes a lot of sense on one level to keep us safe, but there's a lot of problems with that. And I'm going to bring them to you in a short show later this afternoon. Thank you very much. And we'll see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.